Hello guys, this is Push Dustin with Source Gaming, and joining me today is James Montagna from WayForward. He's a director there who has directed several games, including Shantae, Wonder Momo, Mighty Switch Force, and a bunch of other games.
That's correct. Yeah, I've worked as a designer slash director at WayForward for a while now. In fact, I think this might be my 10th year at WayForward, so that's
Oh
actually kind
wow.
of crazy. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. I
hmm
guess I should speak to my credentials a little bit. I've been playing Super Smash Brothers since the Nintendo 64 game, so I've always been a fan of the series and definitely a Masahiro Sakurai follower. We were just talking a little bit before the
hmm
going on there. I've read a bunch of his books, Think About the Video Games books, and kind of been interested in his design philosophy. So yeah, that's kind of like where I'm coming from here, and also being an indie developer myself outside of WayForward stuff. I've kind of got a little bit of different perspective on the topic of indie games, so
hmm
we'll be covering that today.
Yeah, we'll be talking about indie representation in Smash, and I guess we should say just outright that James, he while he's from WayForward, his views might not represent WayForward itself. Okay, so far in Smash, we've only had one form of indie representation. That was the Commander Video Trophy, and that made it in the Smash for Wii U. And I think what happened was that the developer kept on emailing Sakurai, and eventually they found out that the trophy was in the game.
Yeah, and I remember the time when that was revealed. Up until that point, there hadn't been any sort of indie game representation in the Smash Brothers series, so it was kind of a shocker. I remember a lot of people reacting to it like, the first question was like, why?
hmm
Like the second question was like, well, what does this mean for everyone else? And of course, there didn't end up being any sort of a indie game character as a playable fighter in the game. And as far as I know, that was the only indie trophy that they ended up adding. But it
hmm
does sort of bring the subject: where else can this go in the future for any future Smash Brothers titles?
Yeah, and in general, Nintendo has kind of had a slow start to indies, but they've really embraced them in the last year. They've been really pushing this whole idea as nindies, I believe they call it.
Right, Nindies, and I think
Yeah,
WayForward counts as one of the Nindies, right? So
yeah.
yeah, it's Nintendo has definitely been a supportive force in the indie game scene, and especially lately, they're kind of waking up to embracing the content that indie developers are creating, and it's kind of an interesting thing to see how Nintendo's support in indie games can drive these games forward and get more eyes on them.
Yeah, and in the U.S. it was a lot sooner, but in Japan it's really been pretty big. Like they had a good presence at Bit Summit, and even with the Nintendo Switch, you see a lot of the launch titles or the launch window games being indie games.
Yeah, there's actually one of the Nintendo Switch games, besides Zelda, of course, that I'm most excited about is a game called Snipper Clips.
Yes.
And if you haven't seen this, like, look up the videos on it. It looks like a complete riot. But that actually started as an indie game that it seems like, I don't know the full story on it, but it seems like Nintendo kind of like picked it up and kind of worked with the developers to bring it to Switch, and it seems like it's a really perfect fit for the console. I'm personally like completely excited about that game. Um, and I mean, while we're on the subject, that would be kind of like nuts for Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
Snipper clips for
Snipper
Smash,
clip character.
right? How would that work?
He just cuts out
It's like
characters.
cut like Mario's like arm and leg off, right? I mean, it sounds a lot worse when I word it that way than it really is, but
Yeah. I feel like Snipper clips would be too OP.
yeah, like unstoppable, right? Just like two
Yeah.
of them. It's like ice climbers, and they're just like hacking people's limbs off. I think it's
Oh my
fantastic,
god.
personally. So yeah, Nintendo's really opening up more to this stuff, I mean, it really seems that way, and so it really kind of like gets Smash Brothers fans thinking about where this can go. as of right
Mhm.
now, there is no Super Smash Brothers game for Switch that has been announced as of this conversation. I personally don't know of anything, but I really would be willing to bet that there's something in development. We haven't heard from Masahiro Sakurai in a while in regards to what he's working on currently, and it
Mhm.
sure would make a lot of sense. I know there'd be a lot of excitement for it, and if there wasn't one on Switch, well, it'd just be a shame, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I believe in October he mentioned that he was working on a project, but he never said what.
Mysterious.
Yeah. He just said that he felt like an older man in the developer room because all the developers were really younger than him.
That's strange to think about because I do always think of Sakurai as one of the younger developers, but yeah, we're all getting older.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Sakurai, he has kind of not rules, but he said some guidelines for third party
Right,
representation in Smash.
right,
And the first thing is that manga and anime characters cannot join the battle.
right. So
And
I've always heard it phrased as the character has to have originated in video games.
yeah, yeah, the character has to originate from video games, and it has to carry some history with them.
Right. And this isn't to say it has to have originated in Nintendo games, which is an interesting
Hmm.
thought because you think about like Cloud appearing in Super Smash Brothers, they're not referencing like his like Theater Rhythm or Kingdom Hearts appearances,
Yeah.
right? Like it's literally Cloud as you think of him from Final Fantasy VII, a game that didn't come out on a Nintendo platform. So when you think about this kind of thing, a lot of people are inclined to say, well, this character didn't appear on a Nintendo platform. I think, like, while that is worth bringing up, it's not a deal
Hmm.
breaker.
Yeah, how we translated was it might be something like a courtesy to include a character who has the experience of being on a Nintendo platform.
Right, absolutely.
So yeah, definitely not a hard requirement. And even with Snake and Brawl, he kind of represented Metal Gear Solid 4. I mean, he had, of course, had Twin Snake representation in that moveset, as well as I think Metal Gear Solid 2.
Right, yes.
Yeah, it was a kind of a mixture of all those games.
Yeah, definitely kind of pulling from source material that was not on Nintendo platforms at the time.
So the last rule is that both companies have to want the character to join the battle.
Right. We were
Yeah.
goofing a bit before the show when we discussed this. Like you have to be in Smash Brothers, Meat Boy. I'm sorry, there's no choice. Like you've been summoned. So yeah, it has to be like a willing agreement. They can't just take a character. Which
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you would think that's obvious, but like it's worth bringing up. It really is a point. They both have to agree.
Hmm. And when Sakurai takes over a character, he basically takes over the character.
Right. It's like you have to be willing to say, okay, I trust you to treat my brand well and incorporate this character into your game. And I'm sure that's been the case with a lot of stuff. Um, and of course, Sakurai researches everything extensively. You know,
Hmm.
every like Pokemon move has to be uh, accurate to reasonable. You know,
Yep.
so there's a reason for that. You know, both companies have to be able to come to that agreement that they want the character in the game and the terms of the freedom to kind of explore what that character can do without too much restriction.
Yeah. When he was designing Pac-Man, he said, "If I don't get this design I want, then I'm not gonna basically use Pac-Man."
Oh, was that in reference to like the modern looking
Yep.
Pac-Man like from what was it
Ghostly Adventures, I believe.
Ghostly Adventures, right? Yeah, and that would have been a little bit strange because when I think of Pac-Man, of course I think of like the classic Pac-Man and all that, right? So
Hmm.
definitely because he was able to have that freedom, he was able to express the character in the way that makes sense most for Smash Brothers.
Yeah. And so a lot of the times the third parties they kind of just hand over their character, and I think communication is a key part of that.
Well, certainly, yeah, there has to be a good relationship and great communication. I mean, when Snake was in Super Smash Brothers, Sakurai-san and Kojima-san, they're buddies. You know, they hang out.
Hmm.
They're friends. It's a mutual kind of relationship where they're going to be communicating. There's a certain trust between them, and I think these days, more so than even back then, it's kind of like a huge honor to be put in Smash Brothers, right?
Hmm.
So most people are going to be pretty cool with it, I think.
Yeah, we saw with Nomura with Cloud. He basically was like, you can use any Final Fantasy character you want.
Right? It's like just take them all, like just
Yeah.
like be in Smash Brothers. It's like a great thing, right? Yeah.
So, knowing all that, how likely do you think that an indie character would eventually get into Smash?
There's that last one. So the first one's
Mhm.
about the not everyone can be added because it's going to be someone that's originating games. The second one is, of course, that both companies need to have an agreement. And the
Mhm.
third is actually one of the most significant ones to me because a lot of indie games don't have this. And the
Mhm.
third one is that the character must carry game history with them, right?
Yeah.
A lot of indie games, they haven't been around that long. They're not carrying this history with them. And these are sort of the notes from Sakurai himself on third party character representation. They must carry video game history with them.
Mhm.
And even for a character that's fairly new, like Bayonetta, there's history. It's the second game in the series. You know, it's they're coming from seasoned developers that have been around and have a lot of experience and are taking influences from previous games in ways, while of course being extremely original. And so I think that's one of the major hurdles for an
Mhm.
indie fighter appearing in Super Smash Brothers. That's not to say there won't be more trophies, and I certainly hope there is. Um, but when we think about fighters appearing in Super Smash Brothers, uh, yeah, there's not a lot of indie games that have that much history. And the other thing is, on the second note of the both companies agreeing, that
Mhm.
requires a lot of communication and trust. When you look at the roster as it currently stands, there are very many characters, in fact, almost entirely made up of characters that have originated in Japan. The only character
Yes.
I can actually think of that technically didn't originate in Japan, and I might be wrong on this, so I'm not entirely sure, but I think Diddy Kong, because it was
Yes.
made by Rare, uh, sort of like doesn't count as being originated from Japan, although Nintendo published the first game with Diddy Kong with Donkey Kong Country, so it could be kind of skewed or argued that yeah, he's from Japan too, right? So
Yes. Diddy's the only one.
yeah, so Diddy's the only one, which is like kind of an interesting thing. So that probably means is they have to cut Diddy from the game. Unfortunately, he's gone. No, I'm just kidding. Diddy's not gone.
Yeah.
No, but what it actually does mean is that a lot of these indie characters. Sorry, Diddy fans, I apologize for that. That was a low blow.
Sorry, Zero.
Yeah, right. I guess if you've been keeping up on the current Smash esports stuff going on, Diddy's tearing it up. No, so what it actually means is that a lot of the American developed indie games that we think of, this includes even like the big players, maybe wouldn't stand a chance because there is sort of a disconnect. Sakurai needs to be able to have the trust and communication. And when it's a studio that's overseas, the first is, of course, the language barrier.
Hmm.
The second, of course, is being like the distance, right? So, which these days maybe it's less of an issue, but it's certainly worth bringing up that that could certainly stand in the way. A lot of the people that have worked with Sakurai to have their fighter as a third party character appear in Smash Brothers are people that have built a relationship outside of just, hey, I want to put your character in Smash Brothers,
Yeah.
personally with Sakurai-san. And I think that is kind of an interesting note about Japanese business in general. Having spent some time in Japan uh, and doing business, I've come to understand there's a lot of basically people wanting to do business with the people that they are close with and trust. American business
Hmm.
works a little bit differently. To me, it seems like business relationships are more formed on, well, this makes a lot of business sense. Like our companies are compatible. where, in my experience, it seems like Japanese business is more, uh, we've built a relationship of trust personally between us, therefore we can do business together.
Yeah. And I definitely feel that way too. That it's more about a history, a shared history, than more so the individual business.
Right.
And Sakurai has mentioned that Smash kind of represents Japanese games a couple of times. One time was in Pushing the Limit, and the other time was a substantial barrier of AAA games, both of which are translated on Source Gaming. And he said that Smash outright represents Japanese games, and that he's very proud of being able to represent Japanese games to the world.
Yeah, it's very true. Smash Brothers is like a flagship of Japanese developed gaming. And it's this one game, it's the number one character game in the world. There's no game that has as many different characters from different games as Smash Brothers does. And that's
Hmm.
a really notable thing. So it's kind of giving these Japanese characters um, sort of a podium to the rest of the world to be able to enjoy them. And so when we think about indie games, um, a lot of people are probably thinking about sort of American developed indie game scene. And quickly, I'd like to define indie games. So it's a
Hmm.
strange term, and I've always felt it was a strange term. And it's personally, it's not even a term I like very much. But when I think of indie games, I think simply of games that are developed or published completely by independently owned and operated companies
Hmm.
or individuals, depending on the size of the game. So that's what we're talking about here. And when we talk about Smash Brothers working with these independently owned and operated companies, you have to consider all the things that we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of land where this doesn't seem too likely that we'll see an indie character in a future Smash Brothers title.
So, as far as trophies or Mii Fighter costumes, you think that there's a good chance or a decent chance at least?
I personally would love to see that happen. There's so many interesting indie characters. As much as I don't think a fighter, because of the topics we've covered, would make sense or be feasible,
Hmm.
when you have something where we set a precedent with Commander Video at least once, where that's where we've had someone appear in the game, I really hope to see it continue. And there's so many characters I can personally think of that would make sense just to have a quick appearance. Characters
Hmm.
that have appeared on Nintendo platforms have built a fan base. Um, a lot of people might be excited to have that character appear in the game, even as a trophy. And perhaps all it
Hmm.
takes is really approaching Nintendo about it for indie developers. Like, okay, we'll be reasonable. Like, we don't expect to have a fighter, but perhaps it'd be really cool to have a trophy or figure appear in the game. And that's, I think, how I almost said Gaijin
Commander Vid.
Games. Yeah, that's their old name, but
Yeah.
they're Choice Provisions now. That's how Choice Provisions got Commander Video in Smash Brothers, according to what I've seen. They just sort of have a
Hmm.
long-standing relationship with Nintendo, and they were like, "Hey, we want to see this happen," enough that they were able to accommodate that. So hopefully, indie developers will take note, reach out to Nintendo, be a squeaky wheel, and see where it goes. So yeah, I certainly think it's possible to have like a trophy representation or maybe some other kind of subtle representation. I don't know what that would be. I don't know if it would be a level that's kind of big, but maybe like an
Yeah.
assist trophy or an item. Actually, that might be kind of weird
Hmm.
if they're just an item from some indie game, but
Yeah.
I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. There's different ways that you can have representation of indie games in
Right.
Smash.
So I think that's reasonable, and maybe that's kind of the thing to focus on the subject of indie representation in Smash. Yeah, maybe a fighter's a bit much. However,
Mm.
seeing a trophy, yeah, it should be reasonable to see that happen. And if there's a new Super Smash Brothers game on Nintendo Switch, I'd certainly like to see it personally.
Yeah. And I think with the Smash Ballot, Nintendo has kind of seen a lot of the demand for particular indie games.
Yes, yeah, certainly. working at WayForward, I was able to kind of gain some perspective on that, and that was something we were really excited about at WayForward because there was a lot of excitement about Shantae, and
Hmm.
we decided to really embrace that and encourage people like, hey, if you want to see this, like, let your voice be heard. um, I mean, Nintendo's listening. This is them opening up to the input, and we were really thankful that there were very many Shantae fans that kind of reached out to us and went to the ballots and voted Shantae. And a lot of the straw polls, Shantae was like number one, and that was like a really cool sort of thing. And so they've probably, I have to imagine that the data that they've gathered from doing the fighter ballot
Hmm.
is important for Nintendo, not only for Super Smash Brothers, but in general to understand where people are at with what characters they are aware of, what characters they're excited about. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting perspective to be at a place like WayForward, and there's a lot of excitement about Shantae as a character in particular, and kind of like seeing that side of it. And certainly, I think they could reference the data that they've collected there in
Yeah.
choosing a trophy.
Oh yeah, definitely. Or as a Mii Fighter costume, or etc.
Yeah, or a Mii Fighter costume, absolutely. And that's that could get really interesting. There's like a lot to play with Mii Fighter costumes as far as giving characters that maybe couldn't quite make the cut a chance to be enjoyed in some sense. And
Yeah.
certainly indie games would be a great fit for that.
Okay. So do you have any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
Well, I'm excited for whatever's next. I trust Nintendo and Sakurai-san to create um, a new game when the time comes. If the time comes, that will please a lot of people. And so I think, uh, regardless of what happens, it's best to be outcome independent and just be excited about what they make. But always continue to let your voice be heard. There's certainly many characters that I personally would love to see represented, and I think it's important to be realistic, but definitely continue to show your enthusiasm because you never know what could happen. Maybe we'll all be surprised by some announcement one day of a character appearing in the game. I certainly hope so, you know? So, yeah, I would
Yeah.
definitely say to continue to be enthusiastic. If you want to see something, let your voice be heard because I think they're listening. They really are.
Hmm. Yeah, I was actually talking to Spazzy a couple days ago, and Spazzy was saying that if Sakurai really wanted to surprise everyone, he would actually bring in a Western character like Lara Croft.
Oh, that would be
Or
nuts.
yeah, just like because the what's that word? The limit is so high right now of what he can do because he dropped Cloud. What's next? Like what can he do to surprise people?
Right. It's interesting because
And
whatever they pick would be included other potential candidates from popular third-party games. So, I mean,
mhm,
you're prioritizing over something like Dragon Quest or Yokai Watch. So I'm giving those examples because I've, thinking about what's ever popular in Japan right now. So
yes.
it's interesting. If there was a Western character, they'd be prioritized over some other like hot potential candidates. That would be really interesting. Yeah, I mean, in some ways that would be huge. That would be like a lot of fun to see. I have to wonder if that would happen though.
Yeah.
So, and that's also like to the point of indie representation. An indie character would be appearing uh, over other potential candidates from even Nintendo or like, as I mentioned, just popular Japanese stuff. But when I think about Nintendo representatives, like certainly
Hmm.
Inkling from Splatoon would be uh, like a shoe-in, I think,
Yeah.
or someone from ARMS. Like a quick side note, I would be ecstatic to see Ribbon Girl personally. That would be
Yeah.
nuts. I would main Ribbon Girl. That would be it.
Yeah. I was saying in the Source Gaming Discord that maybe they could replace Corrin with a character from ARMS.
Right, do like a doppelganger character or clone as people
Yeah.
call it. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like, so when you think about like a Western character appearing or an indie character appearing, you have to think, okay, like get in line because there's like a lot of other characters from Nintendo and like from Japan that are like really probably great candidates. So it's kind of
Hmm.
always got to keep that in mind, be realistic. But hey, you never know. I want to stay enthusiastic and be optimistic about a character from an indie game like Shantae or something appearing in the game. You never know. It could be
Yeah.
cool. Personally, I'd love to see when I think about Japanese indie games like uh, Azure Strike or Gunvolt. Like you have to
Hmm.
picture how these characters work, like tagging targets and like having like an electrical field, like that kind of thing. There's definitely okay. This is a quick side note. I'm going to say something crazy. I read an article recently about
Hmm.
Shigeru Miyamoto being inspired for the Kingdom Builder mode in Super Mario Run by
Yeah.
a Japanese indie game, actually.
Oh wow.
And the indie game, you may have heard of this one, is Neko Atsume.
Oh yes, of course.
So it's if you think about Neko Atsume inspiring Miyamoto, that's like a crazy thought in itself.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, if you want to get super ridiculous, Neko Atsume stage for Smash Brothers. Think about it. Just let that sit there.
I guess Chubbs would be a stage hazard.
Right, exactly. Anyway, I guess we're getting pretty ridiculous here, but it's all in good fun.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I'd like to add is that Sakurai does play a lot of video games. We forgot to mention that.
Right.
If you look on Source Gaming, we recently just translated Sakurai's Surprise in Storage, I believe.
That was
And
fascinating, by the way. I like had to like go home and start like cleaning my living space and organizing my stuff after reading that. Really inspiring. Everyone go read that article.
yeah, so yeah, Sakurai has tons and tons of video games. He plays, I think, at least 3 hours every day or something.
Right.
Yeah, he has
Amazing.
incredible time management.
Yeah, that, like I think he exercises while he plays, while like fast
Yep.
forwarding through like shows on television.
Yeah, he watches it like at 1.2 times 5 speed or something like that.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So he's aware of a lot of games. Like he played Goat Simulator. He's played Minecraft, of course.
The goat
So
simulator for Smash.
yeah, he hasn't really written in depth about an indie game. I think for a Famitsu column, as far as I'm aware, most of his Famitsu columns tend to be about bigger games.
Right. That's true. He has mentioned Minecraft in the past, though, right? If I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. So, and technically, that was an indie game.
Hmm.
It's not anymore, but yeah.
Yeah. We can get a Minecraft stage in Smash,
I remember.
or
I
or
remember when
Steve.
the Pilot Wings stage first got revealed. There was a bunch of little
Yeah.
kids like, "What is this? Is this Minecraft?" Because it had like the Super Nintendo graphics, and like, I wanted to be like, "Oh my gosh, we need to educate you."
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah.
Steve for Smash Brothers. There you go.
Yeah. Those posts were on Miiverse, right?
Yeah, yeah. Miiverse.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember
Miiverse is
those. Yeah.
Miiverse is precious.
Really sad to see it go.
One thing that I really want to emphasize is that if you really love a character, then don't let this discussion discourage you. Please go ahead and still support them. Don't let anyone tell you what character to support or not.
Where can people find you?
Follow me on Twitter at James Popstar because I will keep everyone up to date on the latest stuff going on with my personal indie game development, as well as anything I can talk about and share with WayForward related stuff. So I'd love to have you on board, and definitely if you've got a Wii U, check out some of my eShop games. Right now I've got a game called Dot Arcade available, as well as a game called Dodge Club Party, which are both kind of experiments with low resolution gaming. And of course, latest WayForward project, Shantae Half Genie Hero, is out now for many different platforms. I certainly hope you'll check it out. We're all really proud of it, and I'd love to hear what you think.
Okay. And I'm Bush Dustin. You can follow me on Twitter. Stay subscribed to this channel for more discussions on Smash, Switch, and everything else.